Thank you. Let's take the next question.
I think you've done an excellent job tonight of defending capitalism. Capitalism has treated you well. In general, it's treated the people in this audience well. And as you say, people respond to things based on their self-interest, so I think they've responded well to you. What I'd like to get to now is the question of the relationship between morality and economic policy, which you talked about before in terms of the quotes from Thoreau. You said that the worst sort of person is the person who's going to try to be charitable and is going to try to be... Well, you said that it's unwise for a person to be charitable or to be sincere. What did you say then?
Let me repeat Thoreau's words. Thoreau's words were, if I knew for certain that a man was coming to my
I think we heard
coming to my house with the conscious design of doing me good, I should run for my life. Now, that's not the same thing as being charitable.
Okay, fine. I'll accept that distinction. Take what Thoreau just said and you've echoed and apply it to American business. And I think what you're basically saying is American business, a corporation.
To businessman.
You are the head of a corporation.
Oh, you're applying to me as the head of a corporation. Right.
Can I ask you the question, please?
Sure.
Now, it seems to me that the implication is that that corporation should not try to do anyone else good, because then the people would run away. What they should do is pursue their own self-interest. That means profit. And what I'd like to talk about is the implications of that in terms of three concrete examples. I believe that a couple of years ago, when there was a major flood in Pennsylvania, you came out as opposed to aid for those disaster victims, based on the rationale that they had bought the land at lower prices because the risk was known, and they shouldn't be given any aid. I'd like people to consider the implications of that. Secondly...
That isn't what I came out against. I came out against the government providing flood insurance at low cost in advance. I did not come out against private individuals giving charity to the people.
What about disaster aid by the government?
I think
the government insures a nuclear power plant.
Well, it's the same thing. The nuclear power plants ought to be required to pay for full insurance themselves, and that ought to be incorporated in their charges. I'm not in favor of government subsidization of nuclear power plant insurance.
Okay, a second...
Look, don't attribute to me your conventional views of what, quote, a conservative believes, because I'm not a conservative. I'm a believer in freedom.
Well, then I'd like to talk about that using an example, freedom. In Ohio, an old man failed to pay his electric bill. You may be familiar with the case. And the electric company turned off the electricity and he died. The reason they turned it off was because it wouldn't have been profitable for them to keep it on because he didn't pay his bill. Do you believe that was right?
I don't know the details of that case at all, but I can well believe, but I'll be glad to... No, excuse me. In many of these cases, you hear stories which, when you find the details, are very different from those that are presented. But let's suppose it were true, which is what I was going to go on to say. You know, why do you want to stop me? Why do you assume I'm always going to give the wrong answer? Let's assume the facts were true. The result is tragic. Who is responsible? Is it really the responsibility? Should I blame the people? Let's suppose that for a moment, let's suppose that the electric company were to follow the practice of never turning off anybody's electricity. Let's just for a moment take that other extreme. Then this wouldn't have happened. Who would pay the cost?
Are those the only two alternatives?
Well, for a moment, we can come to other alternatives, but I just want to show you the logic of the case. Because I want to show you...
absurdity.
No, it's not an absurdity, because I want to show you that what you have to ask about are the costs imposed on different individuals. The electric company is meaningless. The electric company is a non-human institution. The electric company, what you must talk about are either the stockholders of the electric company, the employees of the electric company, or the customers of the electric company. Those are the people involved. Now, if you go to the other extreme and adopt a policy that the electric company will never turn anything off, then you effectively institute a system under which the only people who will pay for electricity will be those who pay for it voluntarily. Now, the number of people who will do that...
Are those the only two alternatives?
No, but I'm just showing you, I want to go, you've gone to one extreme, I'm going to the other extreme and show you that where the responsibility really lies for the kind of thing you're describing. The responsibility really lies not on the electric company for turning it off, but on those of this man's neighbors and friends and associates who are not charitable enough to enable him as an individual to meet the electric bill. You're blaming the wrong person for what happened.
Okay, well, I think people understand that example. I have just one more example. This has to do with the Ford Pinto. I'm not sure if you're aware of the recent revelations that have come out about the production of that car. Ford produced it knowing full well that in any rear-end collision, the gas tank would blow up because they had failed to install a $13 plastic block in front of the gas tank. And Ford estimated in an internal memo that that would cost about 200 lives a year. And they estimated further that the cost of each life would be $200,000. They multiplied and they found that the cost of installing those blocks in each of the cars would be more than the cost of saving those 200 lives. And over the past 7 years, the car has been produced and over 1,000 lives have been lost. It seems to me that Ford did what would be the right thing according to your policy, and yet that seems to me to be very wrong.
Well, let me ask you, let's suppose it would have cost $1 billion per person. Should Ford have put them in nonetheless? You
But
see,
it wasn't a question of
you know that
It was
you're
a
really
question
only
of
arguing about
$13
price.
each.
You're not arguing about principle. No. Because you cannot, nobody can take the principle. Nobody can accept the principle that an infinite value should be put on an individual life. Because in order to get the money involved, in order to get the resources involved, it's not money. In order to get the resources, they have to come from somewhere. And you want the policy which maximizes the situation overall. You cannot accept a situation that 1 million people should starve in order to provide one person with a car that is completely safe.
That's absolutely right.
Right. And therefore, you're not arguing anything about principle. You're just arguing whether Ford used $200,000 was the right number or not.
No, I'm not arguing
Suppose
that
it were
at all.
$200 million.
No.
Suppose it were $200 million. What should Ford have done?
$200 million for what?
Suppose it would have cost $200 million per life saved. Should Ford still have spent that $200 million?
You mean per...
That's not the question.
That's not really the question.
Yes, it is a question.
Yes,
That's the
they should
principle of
have.
the question. That's the only principle involved. I don't know whether Ford did the right right answer or not. That's a question of whether these numbers are valid numbers for the relative costs of different things. You're not arguing about a principle if you once agree with me that if it had been $200 million, the cost per life saved would have been $200 million. You would not argue. Look, let me go back for a moment.
Can I say something in response to that? If Ford had not been able to market those cars in the same kind of economic bracket because of the price of installing this one plastic block, that would be a different question. Maybe Ford could have considered redesigning the whole car so as to make it cheaper. But what we're talking about is balancing advantages and balancing principles.
And that's why
Just a minute.
You're only talking
I'm a
about
supporter of abortion. Therefore, I don't believe that every single human life is sacred. I believe that principles have to be balanced. And yet, I don't see Ford spending $13 less on each car at the cost of 200 lives a year as being a principled position to take, and yet I think your logic requires it.
Suppose it had been one fewer life a year. So that the $13 per car, so that one life, instead of being 200 times, what's 200 times? 200,000, it's 40 million. Suppose it had been one life a year, so that it cost 40 million. Would it then have been okay for Ford not to have put in that block?
You can't predict that one life is going to be cost because of a physical defect in the car. This was a clear...
I know, but you're evading the question of principle.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that they knew before they put the car out that there was a mechanical defect in it.
You know when you buy a car, you know that your chance of being killed in a Pinto is greater than your chance of being killed in a Mack truck.
No, I didn't. I didn't know that the gas tank would rupture.
Of course it is the question. Every one of us separately in this room could, at a cost, reduce his risk of dying tomorrow. You don't have to walk across the street. Of course. The question is he willing to pay for it? And the question here he should be raising, if he wants to raise a question of principle, the principle he should raise is whether Ford wasn't required to attach to this car the statement, we have made this car $13 cheaper, and therefore it is whatever the percent is, it is 1% more risky for you to buy it.
But why?
Now then he would be arguing a real question of principle.
Why should they
Because
do
then he
that?
would-
Doesn't that interfere with the free enterprise system that you're touting? Why not?
Because the consumer should be free to decide what risk he wants to bear. If you want to pay $13 extra for that, you should be free to do it. If you don't want to pay $13,
Wait.
excuse me, we have to keep it to the audio over here.
So then the government does have the right to require information of corporations,
No.
is that right?
No, the government has a right to provide courts of law in which corporations that deliberately conceal material that is relevant can be sued for fraud and made to pay very heavy expenses. And that is a desirable part of the market, of course. What I'm trying to say to you is that these things are really a little bit more subtle and sophisticated than you are at first led to believe. There are no, you can't get easy answers along this line, because your way of putting it really only doesn't really get at the fundamental principles involved. The real fundamental principle is that people individually should be free to decide how much they're willing to pay for reducing the chances of their death. Now, people mostly aren't willing to pay very much. I personally regard this as very, very illogical. I see people on all sides of me smoking. Now, there's no doubt, nobody denies that that increases their chance of death. I'm not saying they shouldn't be free to smoke, don't misunderstand me. I just think they're fools to do it. And I know they're fools because I quit on the basis of the evidence 18 years ago. But that's the real issue. And if you want to be rated for it, you ought to be rated on those terms, not on the ground that you don't think they use the right numbers. Now, look, I don't think we can keep on going very much. I'm afraid we're going to run out of tape, and I'm afraid I'm going to run out of voice. So I think I'll call it down. Thank you.